Freestyle jobs in Jenkins are like riding a horse. It works, but what if you could launch a rocket instead? And that rocket is the Jenkins pipeline. And today, we'll teach you how to write your first one using a declarative syntax, the modern, cleaner way to do a CI/CD pipeline. Hey everyone, my name is Prashant and welcome back to the Jenkins Masterclass. In today's video, we are going to, you know, learn about a declarative pipeline and get some hands-on experience with them. Where we are basically going to learn what a Jenkins file is, how to add some parameters, what are the environment variables, some post actions, and even run some steps in the parallel part as well. So let's just start with the discussion. Well, as I mentioned, freestyle jobs are like horses and pipelines are like rocket ships. So this is what the future of CI/CD pipeline would look like with the Jenkins pipeline itself. When we talk about a Jenkins pipeline, you know, uh, Jenkins file in general. So Jenkins files is like a text file which consists of a complete CI/CD pipeline code that you basically write it around. You store these files in a source GitHub code repository, and then you can actually run those code from a GitHub repository, or you can just copy paste the code and create a pipeline from Jenkins itself. So there are basically two types of Jenkins file that you can create. One is a declarative, which is a simpler one. The other one is scripted, which is like a Groovy based script that we are going to write it down. Now in the declarative, it's a modern, much cleaner way to basically write out your, pipeline in general. So, we'll basically be, talking about declarative pipeline today. Why declarative pipeline? Because it's easy to read and maintain, and it basically encourages the best practices that you can follow into the industry. Also, it's very suitable for teams and the scalable system. So even if you come from a background where you don't have a lot of experience with work with Java, you can easily pick up the declarative pipeline syntax and then work around with that. So without wasting time, let's go ahead and look into the declarative pipeline and how can we basically go ahead and create those pipelines. So today video, what we are basically going to have is we'll create a declarative pipeline. We'll connect our Jenkins with variety of the EC2 instance actually, and kind of create a complete pipeline code for us. So first of all, what I'm basically going to do is I will make sure that my Jenkins is running perfectly fine. So as you can see, I have my Jenkins which is running perfectly fine for me. Right now, obviously, I have to. If you have to create a Jenkins pipeline, first you go and click on a new item. You write out a new item. So let's say, for example, hey, I'm basically going to create like, hey, this is going to be a Prashant Jenkins tutorial, right? And then in the pipeline section, you are going to select a pipeline. And this is something that we are basically going to follow. Freestyle project, as we discussed, as you already are aware of, right? It's a very simple one to create with a proper UI. You don't write anything, or you just write bunch of scripts, the bash scripts, the bash command, and get the task done. Good for beginner people, but when you're writing a complex pipeline code, that's exactly where the pipeline is basically going to come across. So let's go ahead and look for the pipelines. I select, I wrote my name, right, and then I basically create the pipeline. A pipeline code would look typically like this. So the description is there, we have a script, and then we have the pipeline. So that's it. So you write a description, whatever you want to write down with this about this pipeline. A poll SCM, right? Poll SCM is like how frequently it is basically going to go back and look for into my GitHub profile, right? So that I supposedly have to write it down, because by default, how the Jenkins is supposed to know, if there's a new commit in my GitHub. So you specify a schedule. It's like a cron job that after every minute you just have to go and see that if there is some sort of a new changes that has been made or not. Okay, so I go ahead and specify. So let's say, for example, 5 star means every minute. You can go ahead and make those changes based upon based upon the poll that you want to do it. I'm saying that, hey, after every minute, Jenkins will have to go to my GitHub profile and GitHub repository, and it'll have to check it out. Now let's also go ahead and create a GitHub repository. So I'll just go ahead and create a new GitHub repository, a very fresh GitHub repository to work with, right? CI/CD, right? I'm just going to create like Jenkins sample, right? I'm just going to create a like something like a Jenkins sample. I love to put across my README file. I'll just put my README file as well. Okay. Okay. So let's go ahead and create a repository. Now inside the repository, I'm going to add some index.html file. Okay. So index.html file. Okay. Right. So just add some file saying welcome, right? Prashant was here. So I basically wrote like welcome, Prashant was here, and I'm basically going to do a commit of it. Okay, so my GitHub repository called as a Jenkins sample is ready, and this is the GitHub repository that I'm basically going to connect to my Jenkins, right? Now here, if you go down, you come across with a pipeline script, and this is something that we are basically going to look around with the pipeline script. As I mentioned, we'll be focusing more on the declarative pipeline, and you can also try out with a sample pipeline like a Hello World pipeline. You have some other pipelines as well to work around with that. Okay, I'll just go with a Hello World pipeline. Very simple. Now, what does pipeline specify? So this is the pipeline block where inside which you are going to write all the pipeline script. This specify agent. Now, what are agents? So let's go back to our drawing board and try to understand a couple of other core concepts around agent and everything. We'll be looking about configuring the agent in the upcoming video, but at least we can know about what are agents and how do we typically write our pipeline code. How Jenkins basically typically work is like, let's say you have a you know instance where your Jenkins is basically running. So you have install the Jenkins in some of the server. Let's say this is an EC2 instance where you have installed the Jenkins, and this is like a Jenkins server. Now, when you're running any pipeline, right? So all these pipeline code, all these steps, whatever you want to run, is basically going to get executed in this particular Jenkins instance itself, where you have installed the Jenkins. And but the problem is like what if there are a lot of team who is basically trying to run their own pipeline to it, because a lot of team can have their own access to this Jenkins pipeline that or the instance, and a lot of team would like to create it, and hence there can be a problem of the resources, that there is not enough resource by the Jenkins to run each and everyone's code altogether. So what do we do about it? Well, the easiest solution to do is that we talk about a concept of agents in Jenkins. Now, agents are basically like a slave nodes. So consider that Jenkins is like a master, right? And you connect some slave node like a normal other instances. So when Jenkins have too many work to do, so for example, let's say the pipeline 1 is asking Jenkins to build a Docker file. Pipeline 2 is asking Jenkins to work around with a Kubernetes. Let's say someone's writing a pipeline 3 and is asking Jenkins to build some Java application. So each and every Jenkins pipeline are basically asking this Jenkins server to do, and Jenkins server gets overwhelmed. Which means, so if the Jenkins server is executing the pipeline 1, the pipeline 2 and pipeline 3 would be in a queue. They're not going to get executed, and hence based upon how much time the pipeline 1 would take, then the pipeline 2 and hence the pipeline 3 would be executed, given obviously that how many what's the core, what's the size of the Jenkins instance that you have to do. So, and hence the concept of these slave and master slave concept comes across. So what you can do is like you can create some other EC2 instances, and let's say this is like a slave EC2 instances. We call it as an agent or a nodes. And you connect these with a Jenkins. So whenever you are basically running any command or you want to run some operations, you specify those operations that okay fine. I'm trying to run a Java application. I know that this Jenkins server is already occupied with it. I can optimize my operations and I can ask this specific server to build the processes, right? This way you can optimize your code. So Jenkins master would actually go ahead and ask the slave to do a lot of tasks for during the pipeline phase. Not just the entire pipeline, you can also take some of these stages of the pipeline to basically work around with that. So that is the concept of the agent. So you can create as many agent as you want, and you can connect to the master. You'll have an agent ID. Based upon the agent ID, you can define the Jenkins that hey look, go ahead and work on those agents as well. That is the concept of agents in general. We'll look into the future video on how to connect an agent altogether. Then the next come across is how do we create a Jenkins, right, pipeline. Now, while creating a pipeline, code, there are a few things that you have to remember. We have something called as stages. So stages are a combination of a stage that you can have. So which means every stage has multiple stage to work around. So let's say for example, hey, this is my build, or like a checkout stage from the Git. I have a build stage. Probably I have a test stage, right? And then I have probably a deploy stage. So these are the individual stages that you can have. Each and every stage has some steps, like an individual steps that you're. So for probably to do a checkout, you're running some git command, right? To do a checkout. To build an stage, let's say you are doing some installation process, then you are running some build command, right, to do it. And all of these are basically the individual step that you are basically counting down, right? Hence the steps. So you divide the entire Jenkins pipeline into stages, which is like inside the stages you have multiple stage. Each stage can have multiple steps altogether, and that's how you are basically going to write it. Now, another core concept about the Jenkins is Jenkins just love plugins. So Jenkins already have a lot of plugin to talk about, right? Which means that for every single work, in the future, we'll talk about a different plugins that will basically be installing into Jenkins. In today's video, we'll be using a plugin called as the SSH agent. Now this plugin basically supports you to connect uh, to a remote EC2 instance using the SSH, and then help you with the entire deployment process. So this is something that we are basically going to look about. Now again, in the Jenkins pipeline code, we also have something called as the concept of environment. Now, just consider like a normal environment where you want to store some variable, right? And then you want to keep on using those variable throughout your program. So, for example, hey, I want to use, you know, a username, right? And I want to use this username throughout. So you can define inside an environment, and then you can use this particular username variable while writing a declarative, code as well. So in the declarative code, wherever you want, you can go ahead and use this username everywhere that you want to basically go ahead and use it. So that is one of the way of understanding an environment. So taking this key concept like an agent, an environment, stages, stage, and steps, we'll be looking into it. So without wasting time, let's go ahead and look for it. Part and pipeline. And the pipeline code, we are specifying about an agent, right? We are writing out an any. Now, one thing that you will find out with an specifically I find out is that Jenkins is probably like, writing code on the Jenkins is like bit weird, because you don't have a proper ID. It becomes very difficult for me to identify and work around with that. And hence, what I tend to do is I love about I decide to write like things in my Visual Code Studio. So I'll just open my Visual Code Studio to write my Jenkins file. So sample dot, and then I'm just going to write a Jenkins file. So the file name is Jenkins file. I'll just increase the font size, and hence I'll just copy paste the one which has been written down so far. What we're going to do is like we'll first start by writing something called as the environment. Okay, now remember the environment consists of a lot of options that we are going to write it down. And so you can simply write out like, okay, fine, you want to have a Git repo as part of an environment, right? You can specify the Git repo link that you want to basically work around with that. So let's go ahead, copy my Git repository. Okay, it's an open source, so I don't have to worry about an authentication. It's in public, so I don't have to worry about authentication. And then you can specify. So as I mentioned, stages, and we have stage and we have a step, and this is the simple hello step, which is basically running around. Now, if you want to create more stage, like, hey, I want to create a stage where I can just run some, Linux command, right? So if I, just want to run some random commands, so I'm just creating a random commands stage. And if you just in case want to run some random command to get your task done, so there is a steps, like steps. Inside the steps you can use an shell as such. Sh defines a shell, and then you can inside the sh, inside the triple bracket, you can write as many commands. So for example, hey, ls pwd, right, who am I, all this shell command. Remember, when you're going to execute, all of these commands are going to get executed inside a Jenkins file. By the way, I just forgot to mention about an agent any. Any means that it will run on any agent. So for example, you connected one node, inside your Jenkins master. With the master, you connected, let's say, 2 or 3 slave node. So what Jenkins will try to figure it out is that if any of the node is free. So if any of the node is free, it'll just quickly go ahead and run on those node as well. Okay, so that is why you specified agent any. If you have any specific agent that you have configured around, you can write down those agent name as well, which we are going to look into the one of the future videos as well. Okay, so we have specified about stage, which is like a random command. And if you just simply go ahead and execute this, you'll be able to find out that your stages are basically going to get executed. So let's go ahead, I'll just run this across. I'll save, apply, save, and it should save. I'll just do a build for now, right? And then it will take some time, and you can see like the build got executed. One other thing about it says like, hey, look, the console output, you can see like ls pwd, right? It basically showed you like where you are basically running things around. One thing I basically like about is a pipeline overview, which was like very clean way of looking into what actually happened with the pipeline. You can see about the steps, you can see the timing, how much did it took to run around. So it can say like it took around 2.4 seconds to run the complete pipeline. The pipeline steps and everything very clearly specified all these stages, what happened in these stages and stuff like that. Okay, so coming back, now we got it. So let's start by first writing and cloning out my Git repository. So I'm going to write a stage which is responsible for let's say a code cloning, right? Code clone. Okay, which means like cloning the code from the GitHub repository. Actually, it should be like code checkout process. And inside this, I'm going to write out some of these steps. Obviously, we've been doing it. So get branch, right? And you specify the branch that you want to work with, and then you are specifying an URL to it, like which branch that you want to, which GitHub repository. Now we already defined the GitHub repository in my environment, right? So I will basically specify a dollar symbol and the Git repository basically, which I basically copied around. So it is this particular command will basically give me a checkout of the code from a specific branch, which is a main branch. Now I might be wondering, like, how did I come across with uh, only that, hey, it's supposed to be a Git branch and not something else, right? So one of the thing is, like, what you can actually look in around is the documentation. So documentation for the Jenkins is extremely important to basically work around with it, right? So again, if you're working with some sort of the documentation, feel free to go back and look for a documentation. So if you go to an official documentation of Jenkins, you'll find out, what are the things that we basically have to do. So I came across with an official documentation of Jenkins with Git, and here you will find out, let's see, right? Okay, so as you can see, like, Git branch and the URL that has been specified. So this is like how you are basically comparing with a GitHub pipeline. So with Jenkins, whatever the plugin that you are going to use around, feel free to look for a documentation. Documentations are the one which is basically going to save your life while writing and working around with the Jenkins itself. That is something which is you cannot evade. So you might be using a lot of a new plugin to get or to implement some sort of the feature, and this documentation is something which is basically going to help you out in working it. Okay, now taking this example, and let's basically go ahead and keep on building our code all together. Okay, so once this has been done, our code has been done, we basically have to make sure that I just need to copy this inside entire code in my EC2 instance. So I need to basically deploy this into my EC2 instance. So for that purpose, what I'm going to go back, I'll just go back to my EC2. I'll create a new instance, right? Okay, so this is going to be a Prashant, right? Okay, Jenkins. Okay, so I love Ubuntu. I will prefer to use Ubuntu altogether. I will just go ahead and open the port of my STP. I'll just don't bother too much, right? I'll just create a new pipeline, Prashant Jenkins. Okay, so now I am basically creating a new pipeline, right? And I'm basically going to run things. Okay, while it is taking some time to run it, there's other configuration that I have to basically do it, which is that I need to create a credentials. Okay, unless I create a credentials for my ecosystem, I won't be able to basically work around. So I need to store this, Jenkins credentials some or the other way. So you go to the Jenkins, manage Jenkins, you go to a credential section. I am storing as a global credentials. I go ahead and add a credential. It'll ask me what kind of a credential. Obviously, it's going to be a such username with a password. Okay, so ID, you can write any ID. Remember, this is the ID that we are basically going to call around. So Prashant Jenkins tutorial, right? Okay, so what are the Jenkins, like? I'll just copy, and it doesn't matter. I said username is going to an Ubuntu. Obviously, it's an Ubuntu instances. Now they'll basically ask me to write a private key. I am going to click, select a direct option. We'll go ahead and open my private key. Okay, open with a notepad. Copy the entire private key. Make sure you don't copy any empty spaces. Once it has been done, you go back, you paste it, right? And then you finally create it as. Remember, this Prashant Jenkins tutorial is something which is extremely important for us to make a note of it. So why don't I just go ahead and make a note inside my environment? Because obviously, why not? We are going to use this as such credential, in multiple places. So as such cred, id equal to, and I'm basically going to store this credential id. Now remember, we need to also store my EC2 username. So my EC2 username is Ubuntu because this is something that I'll be using it. EC2 host I also need, which is like my IP address for it, right? So let's go ahead and set up my EC2 instances. So I hope my EC2 instances um, running perfectly fine. Okay, yeah, it's running perfectly fine. My public IP is there. I copied my public IP, and I'm basically paste. Okay, I didn't copy it. Okay, I copied my public IP. I am going back to my connect option. I am basically connecting to my, Ubuntu system. I obviously need to prepare my Ubuntu system for that matter. Okay, so let's go ahead and update, because the first thing which I do is obviously to update my Ubuntu instance. So do I have to update? Okay, so it got updated. Now let's go ahead and sudo apt install nginx, because I'm going to work with nginx. So something I need to extremely be careful about. Sudo apt install nginx, and hence my nginx. Okay, so nginx is done, right? Okay, I don't have anything, right now I'm inside my /home/12, obviously. So let's go ahead and, now keep on writing things around. Now remember, like, when you have made a checkout of the code, if you just simply go ahead and, if I just simply go ahead and, run this entire part once again, I'll just, remove this stage for now. So what I'm trying to do is, like, I basically, uh, did a bit of the shuffle. I haven't implemented it yet. I'm just going to show you that code checkout was done, and you can see, like, the, all the files that we have done is right now going to be in my Jenkins instance. Okay, so if I simply go back to my system, right? Okay, apply, save, and let's build it. Okay, so it will just build my, okay, so it got built pretty much. Okay, so if you look into a console output, you can see when I'm running an ls command, I can see a readme and an index.html file, which clearly shows that, hey, my, application basically got cloned after a, checkout option, which you can obviously see from pipeline overview as well. As in the pipeline overview, you'll find out we did a code checkout, and after the code checkout we did a random commands, and the random command basically can show us the steps that we have done so far, right? Okay, okay, that gives us a lot of, things that, hey, we are right now in the right direction, right? Next stage is that, okay, what we want to do is, like, we want to basically send these file into our EC2 instance, right? So send files to EC2. So let's do a quick, check back here. Okay, and then we'll just keep on writing the code. So what we are basically trying to do at this point is that we have this Jenkins server, right? We have our, this is a GitHub. So this is our repo. So what we have done is so far is, like, we are basically cloning the entire code from the Jenkins inside the Jenkins server. So all these source code are here inside my Jenkins server. Now this is a EC2 instance where we are basically thinking of deploying our application, right? Okay, so in order to deploy an application, what we are basically thinking is that we need to send this source code into our EC2 instance directly. Okay, so in order to send this file, we know that we can use an scp command to send a file. So first, I will break down this process into two parts. First, I am going to send the file into the EC2 instance in the /home/ubuntu folder. Okay, so first I'll send this file to an Ubuntu folder. Then I will again do an SSH, right? And then move this particular file from this folder, right? Okay, move or copy whatever the command that you want from /home/ubuntu star to, right, to /var/w/html. Now, why this specific folder? Because this is the exact folder which is by default is configured with Nginx. So since I am installing an Nginx to deploy my static HTML file, by default this is the folder where the files are basically going to be there. So this is the process. So I am basically going to write two steps. One is sending a file to EC2 instance, and the second one is copying things across. Now, just to do a cross check, quick cross check that okay, my EC2 instance is working perfectly fine and I'm happy to do it, I will basically make sure that I have installed Nginx. So now if you look into my Nginx, right? If you look into my Nginx, the Nginx is there. You will always be able to find out this index table option, which means if you just try to open this file, right, this IP address, you should be able to see this welcome to Nginx, uh, page being open. Okay. However, what we are trying to do is we are not trying to, obviously, we have our own HTML file for that purpose. Now, people who are actually, wondering like why var HTML, well, guys, you can actually look into the configuration of an Nginx. You go to an configuration of Nginx, you see these sites available, right? And inside this, there's a default configuration file. Right, this is an Nginx default configuration file. And if you look into the default configuration file of an Nginx, you'll find out that there is a root directory which is specified that, hey, I'm basically going to look into it. Now, how do you modify it? That's a very different sort of the question altogether, probably for some other day. But definitely this is something that, you modify. So that was just a bit of the sidetrack. Going back to our main discussion once again, which means going back to our configurations. Okay, so we go back to our configurations and we were writing the code. So let's go back and continue our writing the code. Now we already know about that, hey, we are going to use an SSH agent as a plugin to work around with an SSH or any of the sort of the action. If you don't know about the plugin, my personal suggestion would be to go to your manage Jenkins. Inside the manage Jenkins, you'll find out there is a plugin section. So go to the plugin section, look for available plugin, search for SSH agent, and you'll be able to find it out. Now in my case, SSH agent is already installed, so I am not too much worried about it, right? But this specific plugin needs to be installed. So as you can see, SSH agent in my case is already installed, so I'm not too much worried about it. But if it's not installed, you need to make sure that SSH agent plugin is actually installed. So let's go ahead and use this SSH agent plugin. We specify the credentials, and I am going to specify this. Now, how to use SSH agent plugin? Again, you'll have to look into a documentation of SSH agent plugin, how to specify and pass on the data as well. Okay. So dollar, and I am going to write env dot where's my SSH agent? Okay, so this is going to my okay. So I'm passing on my environment value to it. Okay, so I passed on my env dot sh create.id to it. Now I'm basically going to run, as I mentioned, some of my scp command. So scp -o, I am basically going to disable the strict key host host key checking. So when you are basically doing an SSH, right, it will basically ask you to do an do a host check, and it will basically do a pop-up that, hey, do you want to add this as a part of the host key or something like that. You have to manually type yes, and but since we are doing an automation process, we want to skip that part, and hence a strict host key checking we are still specifying it. So minus r star, which means I'm basically copying everything from my Jenkins server, and I'm basically specifying it into my EC2 instance. So hence my EC2 instance mean env dot and I am basically going to have this EC2 username, right? EC2 username at the rate, right, dollar and env dot, right, and then I am basically going to specify a EC2 host, right? Okay, and finally slash home slash ubuntu. Okay, so this basically takes me to the part where I have basically copied everything inside my EC2 instance, inside my slash home slash ubuntu directory. Okay, so if everything worked perfectly fine, this would basically copy things around. Next, I will do the kind of the same stage, right? I'll just literally copy this first, but instead of SCP, my whole objective is to basically do an SSH and copy files to nginx directory, right? So instead of SCP, I am basically going to do an SSH. Okay, my strict host key checking is fine. We don't need this, we don't need this, and after doing an SSH, I have to run some of my the command, right? Now the best part is, how do you do it is that when you do an SSH, you can just pass on the command that you want to write inside a single quote, which means all the command that you are going to write it around will be executed part of it. So sudo cp -r slash home slash ubuntu, right? And then I'm basically going to copy, as I mentioned, slash star slash var slash lu slash html. Okay, which means I'm basically copying all the files first to my ubuntu instance, and then I am running a sudo copy command to copy everything inside my ubuntu. Okay, that gives me my discussion. I am basically going to copy paste, save, apply, and finally just build my pipeline once again. So the pipeline gets built perfectly fine. As you can see, there is no error which is there with the pipeline. You can look into the pipeline overview option, how much time it took. It took around 11 seconds to complete it. It basically got executed. If you go into a EC2 instance, if you just run things around, you can find all this process has been done, which means that if I go here and I just do a reload of it, it should be like, hey, welcome, Prashant was here. So we successfully managed to check it. Now we do a cross verification, because what if I am basically going to do, because the pipeline means that a developer made changes into the code base and it should automatically get triggered, right? So I'm basically going to write some other section to it, h2, right? About me. Okay, I love cricket and tech. Okay, so I'm basically going to go ahead and update this comment, which means if I have done everything perfectly fine, my pipeline should actually get in some time, obviously within a minute of time, because that's what the cron that we have specified. Within a minute, it should automatically trigger a new pipeline, new build process, and it should automatically go ahead and, as you can see, it got triggered, and hence in few seconds more it should complete it, and we should be able to do a reload on our main application. As you can see, we can do a reload, and you can see that pipeline got triggered. So this basically helped us in creating a complete pipeline from the scratch. So right now we just managed to create a complete pipeline, and it's a very very easy pipeline to basically create, which is like taking the source code, deploying the application, writing a complete declarative pipeline, and then provide it. Do look couple of suggestions while you are working around with that. Do look for the documentation. So documentation is something which becomes part of extremely important. Even if you're looking for an as such agent documentation, as such agent, so you can just run for a Jenkins. So you can just run for an as such agent Jenkins, and you can see for the Jenkins as well. So as you can see, this is the exact same thing that we basically typed across. So the documentation plays a very important part of your life when you are working with any of the plugin. You won't be able to memorize all the command, which is totally fine. So hence the documentation becomes a key aspect to your working part as well. I hope that cleared out with the Jenkins. You guys are comfortable with working on the Jenkins. If you have any questions still left, uh, write down on the comment box. I'll try to answer as many questions as possible. If you like the video, go ahead and like and share and subscribe. Thank you. See you in the next video.